On the 7th of June 1951, at the prison in Landsberg am Lech, the lives of 7 Nazi mass murderers came to an end via the hangman's noose. They were Paul Blobel, Otto Ohlendorf, Erich Naumann, Werner Brauner, Oswald Pohl, Georg Schallemer and Hans Theodor Schmidt. Just before they were hanged, they were photographed for the record. The execution was reported in Time magazine, which wrote thus, and I quote, "Former SS Colonel Paul Blobel was the first to go. Shortly after midnight, 4 husky MPs led him across the floodlit yard of Landsberg prison. On the gallows platform, a US Army hangman was waiting for him. Blobel, responsible for the killing of 30,000 Jews at Kiev in 1941, got 90 seconds for his last words. Thrusting out his spade-bearded chin, he cried, 'I die in the faith of my people. May the German people be aware of its enemies.' 'Attention,' called Colonel Walter R. Graham, Landsberg's US commandant. Blobel stiffened. The hangman and his assistant slipped a black hood over Blobel's head, adjusted the heavy noose. A priest intoned a prayer. The trapdoor sprang open with a clatter. With the long-dropped hanging technique that usually kills immediately, Blobel died much quicker than many of his victims, and he did not have the indignity of having to take his clothes off before execution. However, the Time correspondent may not actually have been there, as Blobel no longer had his trademark beard, which had by this time been shaved off. The executions had been delayed. Time, on Monday the 4th of June 1951, wrote, and I quote, and please bear in mind that this is what was reported then, even though now we know that this information is not absolutely correct. Dressed in the scarlet death cell garb, the 7 condemned Nazis waited in Landsberg prison for their midnight appointment with the hangman. The hearses with the empty coffins were ready to take the bodies to hometown cemeteries. Late in the evening, the men said goodbye to their wives. The 7 were no ordinary Nazis. Oswald Pohl, one-time boss of all Hitler's concentration camps, 4 million died in the gas chambers at Auschwitz alone, had ordered the extermination of the Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto. Paul Blobel, Werner Brauner, Otto Ohlendorf and Erich Naumann had supervised the murder of 2 million people, mostly Jews, Gypsies and communist suspects in the conquered lands of Eastern Europe. Hans Schmidt was adjutant of Buchenwald. Georg Schallemer had run the mass murder machine at Dachau. They were the most wretched specimens of 28 Nazis condemned by a US war crimes court in 1946 and 1947. The 21 others had been reprieved by US authorities. A small but vocal lobby had worked hard to reprieve the last 7 men in scarlet. Its efforts were backed by Bonn's Vice-Chancellor Franz Blücher, leader of the nationalist German Free Democratic Party, socialist leader Dr. Carlo Schmidt, and $12,000 of Bund government funds. Twice, the Department of State and the Defense Department had granted stays of execution, while appeals were being considered in federal courts. But in April, the US Supreme Court refused to review the case. On May the 22nd, US High Commissioner McCloy turned down a final plea. Without McCloy's knowledge, Warren McGee, Washington attorney for the 7 Nazis last week, played one more card. Going to court in Washington, D.C., presented Federal District Judge Walter M. Bastian with a new argument. There's no capital punishment under West German law. Judge Bastian, new to the case, decided, I just don't have the heart to let these men be executed today. The State Department quickly relayed Judge Bastian's stay of execution to Frankfurt. Shortly before midnight, the 7 Nazis were told that they would not hang that night. Commissioner McCloy said aides were thunderstruck and confounded by the reprieve. Still in the basement death row of Landsberg prison, the 7 would now wait for federal courts to rule on whether Attorney McGee's argument had merit, a procedure that could take months. But Frau Schmidt, relieved of her death watch in the Landsberg hotel, remarked, Now he must immediately cancel the coffin and the hearse. This is the scene of Blobel's greatest crime in terms of the number of the victims. Babi Yar is located within Kiev. In 1941 there was a deep and wide ravine here. However, there have been major topological changes to the site. Blobel played his part in some of those topological changes. Wehrmacht army engineers blew up the sides of the ravine to hide the crime that he had committed here on the 29th or 30th of September 1941, when 33,771 people were murdered. Later, Blobel had to come back and dig up the bodies in order to burn them. Today, there is a well laid out park where the story of what happened at this location is commemorated, and there are monuments for the victims of Nazi terror and hatred. Paul Blobel was born in Potsdam on the 13th of August 1894, the first son of master carpenter Wilhelm Blobel and his wife Anna, née Tralst. In 1899 the family moved to Remscheidt, where he attended elementary school and a vocational training school, where he stayed until 1912. He then completed an apprenticeship as a bricklayer and carpenter in 1912 and 1913, whilst attending a trade school in Wuppertal. He worked as a carpenter until the outbreak of the First World War. On the 10th of August 1914 he joined the army as a war volunteer at the recruit depot of the reserve battalion of the 24th Pioneer Regiment in Cologne. On the 27th of November 1914 he was at the front line. On the 29th of June 1915 he received promotion to Überzahllicher Gefreiter. It's quite difficult to translate the ranks of the Imperial German Army, as they no longer exist, and they had a variety of extra levels that are not in use today. However, I use the German terms, and at least one sees that he is advancing in rank. He became an Etatmäßiger Gefreiter on the 24th of December 1915, and Etatmäßiger Unteroffizier less than 1 month later on the 19th of January 1916, which might be indicative of the losses being suffered by his unit. He was the platoon commander and in 1917 was assigned to the assault battalion, where he might have learnt the flame-throwing skills that he would later use in the Holocaust. On the 2nd of May 1918 he received promotion to Etatmäßiger Vizefeldwebel, which is usually translated as Vice Sergeant. This is a rank that existed in the German army until the end of World War I, although it was used in some local volunteer units in Eastern Europe during the Second World War, but not in the Wehrmacht. On the 9th of May 1918 he was taken to Field Hospital number 368, whether wounded or sick the record doesn't say. On the 28th of November 1918 he was discharged from the military. After being demobbed, Blobel found it difficult to get work and lived in Remscheidt. He went back to the trade school for the construction industry in Barmen again. In 1921 he found work and for the next 3 years worked for various companies in the Solingen area. In 1924 he began to work as a self-employed architect. He became unemployed again in 1928 and following the 1929 crash had a longer period of unemployment which lasted from 1930 to 1933. During this time he lived off benefits. It was also during this time that he joined the National Socialist Party. Blobel became a member of the NSDAP on the 1st December 1931 with the membership number 844662. He joined the SS in January 1932 with membership number 29100. He was also a member of the Reichskolonialbund, Luftschutzbund, and the NSV, the National Socialist Assistance Organization. For a time, he was also a member of the Reichsbund of the Visual Arts. He advanced as far as Scharführer in the General SS, roughly equivalent of lieutenant, and to Standartenführer in the SD, which is roughly equivalent to colonel. In 1933, he found office work in the city administration, although at his trial he claimed he was only earning a pittance. He claimed it was the city administration, but in fact he was actually working for the Gestapo. In 1935, he was doing some freelance work in the offices of the Düsseldorf SD when he came into contact with a National Socialist official who either suggested that he could get a better job by using his party contacts, or Blobel, seeing how well the other people were doing, decided to pull some party weight. Whatever the plan, it worked out well for him. In June 1935, he was employed by the SD security service in Düsseldorf. His job there was intelligence gathering and administration. He must have been good at it, as in May 1941 he was ordered to the Reich Security main office in Berlin, and thus began his 10-year journey of horror that would lead him to the execution chamber in Landsberg prison. At his trial, Blobel stated that he was appointed head of Einsatzkommando 4A in June 1941, and in that month he went to the police border training facility at Prech in Middle Saxony. This was the murder meeting of the heads of the Einsatzkommando just before the invasion of the Soviet Union. Einsatzkommando 4A was part of Einsatzgruppe C. The latter was under the command of Dr. Otto Rasch, the two doctors before his name indicating his qualifications in the German style. The area of operations assigned to Blobel's Einsatzkommando was in the area of the 6th Army, which was commanded by Field Marshal von Reichenau. Blobel participated in a number of mass killings during his time, which were documented in situation reports sent to Berlin and later used at both the International Military Tribunal and at the Einsatzgruppen trial. The mass killings started almost immediately. From the 27th to 29th of June 1941, Blobel killed what was termed 300 Jews and 317 communists in the region of Sokal and Łódź in the part of Poland that had been occupied by the Soviet Union in September 1939 and then captured by Nazi Germany. Around the 29th of July, 2,531 people were killed near Zhytomyr, and in July or August 1941 in Fastov, southwest of Kyiv. All Jews between the ages of 12 and 60 were killed there. At his trial, Blobel confessed that in August or September 1941 an execution took place at Korosten, around 80 kilometers north of Zhytomyr, in which about 700 to 1,000 men were shot, and at which Dr. Rasch was also present. Documents also show that the Einsatzkommando killed in September or October 1941 on the road between Vilna and Dedorov 32 gypsies, at Kyiv on 29th to 30 September 1941, 33,771 Jews, on the 8th of October 1941, Yagotin 125 Jews, on the 16th of October 1941, 1,800 people in Lubne, and on 23rd of November 1941 in Poltava, 1,538 Jews. These situation reports were sent back regularly and showed a cumulative total, as we shall see. Blobel claimed that he organised only 2 mass killings, and in this case he divided his unit into a number of firing squads of 30 men each. He explained that the victims were first captured by the police, local militia or others, and mass graves dug. When the execution was to take place, 15 people were led to the edge of the mass grave, and then they were forced to kneel down facing the grave. At the beginning, clothing and valuables were not collected. Later, this was changed. The murder squads consisted of men from the Sonderkommando 4A and from militia and police. After the people were ready to be killed, the order to shoot was given by the platoon leader. The victims, who had been forced to kneel at the top of the mass grave, fell straight into the pit. Blobel used firing squads rather than the method used by some other Einsatzkommandos of one man firing into the nape of the victim's neck. Each commando fired for about an hour and was then relieved. The people still to be shot were gathered near the execution site and were guarded by the members of the commandos who were not taking part in the killings at that moment. Blobel freely admitted that Einsatzkommando 4A also shot women and children. In September-October 1941, Blobel received from Einsatzgruppe C under Dr. Rasch a gas fan, and killings were carried out using it. According to Blobel, the vehicle used was a 3-ton truck. Whereas no further information is known about this vehicle, it preceded the use of gas fans at Helmno nad Nerem, where they were used as from the 8th of December 1941. At Helmno, the victims were loaded onto the vehicle, the doors slammed shut. The vehicle drove a few meters to where a gas hose was attached from the engine, and the fumes went into the rear where the victims were suffocated. During archaeological works at Helmno, a number of poison flasks were found, suggesting that this may have been added to the mix. On the 13th of January 1942, Blobel was relieved as head of Einsatzkommando 4A for undisclosed health reasons, although it was probably due to his alcohol problems. He admitted at a trial that this was a punishment. In part 2, we shall see how Blobel's task in the service of National Socialism changed from that of the destruction of life to the destruction of the corpses of the people who had been killed earlier.